Africa's relationship with China was in the spotlight this week as Senegal hosted the 2021 Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. A number of new investment deals were announced and Beijing promised 1 billion COVID vaccines for Africa. Now, China is the continent's largest trading partner, but Africa exports way less to China than China exports to Africa. In 2019, direct trade was worth well over $200 billion and China invests heavily in Africa. These were the countries that were the top 5 recipients of Chinese investment in the same year. Now, in a moment, I will be asking a China-Africa expert if China is really good for Africa. But first, this report from Kenya, which shows a very real and present example of how China is establishing itself in Africa, and not only through financial means.
25-year-old Andrew Matetai is not afraid to get his hands dirty. Since he graduated in December, he's been helping out on the family farm, and like many young Kenyans who recently entered the job market, he's looking for work. But Andrew has an ace up his sleeve. He speaks Mandarin. This decision came as more Chinese contractors flooded Kenya to build its roads, and he thought learning the language might give him an edge, an experience that would be revealing.
My name is Andrew in English, so they changed it to Andalou. So this was the name I used to go by, even in school, in class, in the exams, we used to use Andalou.
Over the years, there's been a steady trickle of Chinese cultural and language centers opening in Kenya. Many, like Andrew's school, offer scholarships, and in some cases, high-achieving students are even sent to China for competitions. But the content of Andrew's classes made it apparent his instructor was teaching more than language.
She was very strategic. She started by showing us, teaching us about Chinese history, Chinese festivals, Chinese poems and songs. For instance, if you choose to do French, you might not need to learn all those things pertaining the history, the culture. You may just need to learn how to communicate. But in Chinese language, they want you to become like them.
There are currently 59 Confucius Institutes spread across 44 African countries. These institutes, together with existing economic ties, add to China's significant reach over the continent. Nairobi-based journalist April Zhu writes extensively on Afro-Chinese relations. She argues that while the Chinese government may have a firm economic grip on the continent, the most significant partnerships are being created outside boardrooms.
I think the important thing to understand when we talk about the kind of Chinese culture that is exported is that it is a very specific cocktail of generally mainstream Han culture that has passed through the prism of the CCP, of the Chinese Communist Party. But at the same time, not everything that comes here in Kenya that makes its way here from China is passed through that lens of the party. There are a lot of day-to-day interactions between individuals that I feel like is a much more rich and interesting place to look at, because those things are not mediated by the state.
In bustling Nairobi, it's hard not to see how these more informal intercultural interactions have influenced everyday life. The city has already played host to Chinese-Kenya joint art performances, which are growing in popularity, especially among the younger generation. 3 Chinatowns have popped up across Nairobi since the 1980s, offering traditional Chinese cuisine with a Kenyan twist. Back in Eldoret, Andrew is under no illusions. He knows that a one-sided cultural exchange is no exchange, but he's also in need of a job. And if that means working in China, he says that's exactly what he'll do.
Now, to discuss more on China-Africa relations, we spoke to the Chief Executive Officer of Development Reimagined. It is the first African, wholly foreign-owned international development consultancy in China. And as Beijing is often accused of using its creditor status to extract diplomatic and commercial concessions from Africa, I began by asking Hannah Ryder how true she thinks that narrative is.
Well, I think the problem with that kind of narrative is that it assumes that African countries in particular are unable to extract from their relationship with China. This is not just a one-way flow, and it is not just a kind of a geopolitical ambition for China or anyone else in terms of development. Engaging with African countries is an opportunity. It is very important for development, global development, and we're seeing that even through vaccines challenges that we're meeting right now. While China is often played as the bogeyman, I think many African leaders, including myself, would say that what has been happening is China responding to African demands for a need for infrastructure and moving ahead with development.
I do want to come here and ask, how can African leaders negotiate better when dealing with China?
So African leaders definitely must negotiate better when dealing with China, but also with all other development partners. I wouldn't single out China necessarily for particularly challenging debt terms. There are many of Chinese loans are highly concessional, but so are loans from the multilateral development banks in general, for example. So I wouldn't say that China is doing worse or perhaps better than any others, but I think definitely there is a very varied experience across the continent in terms of extracting conditions and, for example, even things like labor use on different projects. And the different interest rate terms. What African governments can do is work together, meet as ministers of finance, but they can also make the contracts transparent. That's never a problem for China, from what we understand. If it is incorporated into national law, African governments can do it. Cameroon is a great example, and they share all the contracts publicly.
Hannah, there is this growing rivalry and competition between Beijing and Washington for the influence on the continent of Africa. Why is Africa so important to these two superpowers?
Well, I think many analysts would say that it's to do with the fact that you have 55 African countries and they all have different, for example, within the UN, have particular influence, significant influence because of the one country, one vote. However, I would suggest that what is more important is to think about the future and where Africa is trying to get to. They should be focusing on how the youthful population, the fact that there's going to be 2.5 billion people by 2050 on the African continent. This is not just about security. It's not just about poverty. It really is about thinking about where is Africa going to be and engaging positively. And I think China is trying to do that, more so perhaps than others in terms of responding to that future. But there's obviously always, with every single partnership, definitely more that can be done.
And would you say, Hannah, that China is good for Africa today and in the future?
I would say that African countries are engaging with China for a reason, and several reasons, in fact. We had a recent report that we put out which says we have 7 different reasons for African countries to engage with China. They are engaging in a way that is delivering good. For example, trade is increasing with China. African exports are going to China more and more. But that needs to, for example, it needs to be in more added value trade and much more diverse across the African continent, not just only, for example, 70% of all the exports from Africa are just from a few countries to China. So, like I said, there is so much more that can be done. I think the announcements that have come carefully negotiated, carefully discussed between African partners and China. We have provided lots of the analysis for them to be able to make those arguments and discussions. And that kind of understanding, that the collaboration, I think, and the announcements today set up for a much better future.
All right. The insights there from Hannah Ryder, talking to us from Dakar, Senegal. Appreciate your time. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.